Geek. Talking baseball every week. 'Cause they're Gleeman and the Geek.
And welcome to Gleeman and the Geek. Roster is a changing edition. I'm John Bonus, Twins Daily with me, Aaron Gleeman of The Athletic. We had some roster moves this week.
Yeah, a lot. A lot of stuff going on.
A lot of stuff going on
Let's
off
say,
the field, not to mention,
yeah, they keep playing games,
taking
too.
2 out of 3 out of the Padres. Which
As
nice.
Rocco Baldelli is fond of saying, we do this every day.
That's right. Yep.
They keep playing. The show goes on, no matter what madness is going on, injury-wise, roster-wise.
That is correct.
Every game, they lose a tough one to San Diego, and all the post-game questions are, how will you guys rebound from this? And did you go in and give a rah-rah speech? And we got to play again tomorrow afternoon. Like, it's the same thing.
Well, and then we also had the Cleveland series to talk about since last Friday.
Yes, and
the showdown in the AL Central.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's the thing about Cleveland and Chicago, for that matter. They both take 2 out of 3 from the Twins.
Right.
Now, the Twins were on the road and everything, and then they just both immediately go back to being terrible. Like, Cleveland's losing to Detroit, who are now in second place.
Right.
The White Sox got walked off on a suicide squeeze by the Royals, I saw, and they're like back on pace for 120 losses or whatever it is. Like, this division, I looked this up last night. I'll read it to you. Not that people have any doubt that the AL Central stinks, but this will maybe contextualize it a little bit.
Looks like the White Sox are on pace for 108 losses this year.
Yeah, that's it, huh? Here are the winning percentages of the AL Central teams in games not against their own division.
Okay.
Okay, so this is like,
yes.
Obviously,
there's a team
within the
outside
division,
right.
it's
going to be 50-50.
You're right. This is like some Highland Park math for you all, but I'm bringing to you. But it's going to be a 500 record if you add it all up. So that, it waters down, because of the way baseball works and how you look at above and below 500. The fact that they're playing a ton of games against each other and it's always going to come out in the wash, it kind of waters down how bad they are, because it makes the records less extreme overall. But if you look, so here are the current winning percentages, and now the number of games played here vary. Like, Detroit has barely played anybody but the AL East and all this stuff. But the Twins are exactly 500 outside of the division. And you say, well, that's not very good. The Guardians have the second best record in the AL Central outside of the division, with a 464 winning percentage, which I'm going to do some quick calculations here.
464 would be
460. Do you want to guess? 464 is a this is a Carleton math major.
Plus 46, 53, 73.
75. Yeah. Take back that degree from this man.
I feel pretty good about getting that 73.
Sure, fine. I had to use a calculator. The Tigers have the third best outside the division record, 433, which now you're at a 90 loss pace. Okay. For sure. Yeah. Right. Over 90 losses. The White Sox, 310 outside that. Just to get a sense, 310 over 162 games, that's 50 and 112. Yeah, that's their pace outside division. And can I tell you something? They're not the worst. The Royals, 286 winning percentage. They've won 28.6% of their games outside of the division. That is a 46 win pace. And just in case people have forgotten, Major League Baseball teams will play 162 games generally. 46 win pace.
That's below replacement level.
Yeah, that's below replacement level is roughly 50 to 55 wins, depending on the system. Yeah, so that's what we're dealing with in the division, and it hides a lot of flaws. You know what I mean? Right. Like, this is why John likes to hang out with me in general, because he looks better by comparison.
So good, right?
Yeah. They say, who's this skinny guy? That's John Bonus. Yeah, it's strange because, and we ran into this a little bit last year before the Twins just completely collapsed with all the injuries and everything, which is, you watched them and you went, this bullpen's a mess, and the starting pitching is sometimes good and sometimes Chris Archer and Dylan Bundy and four and fly, and the lineup is inconsistent, and seems like probably an 82 to 85 win team, and yet you look and they were in first place for 100 and whatever days because the division's so bad, and part of you wants to go, well, are we being overly critical about a first place team? Right. And then part of you, or part of me at least, wants to go, well, what does a first place team mean? You know what I mean? Like,
well, I mean, that is
that happened this week. Right, where Correa was talking about, I'm not hitting, the team isn't hitting.
Don't say the word confidence, John. We're not allowed to say that. After the Patreon subscribers will know what we're talking about.
But we're somehow still in first place. It absolutely felt like the sky was falling by.
And then you look up and they're 3.5 games up.
Tuesday night, it felt like this team was wasn't going to win 60 games the entire year.
Right.
And then you're like, oh yeah, they are in first place by 2.5 games.
So it's a really strange now for the second year in a row. And look, we in the early days of when we started blogging, and even not quite when we started podcasting, because we chose the inopportune time of right when they started to collapse as an organization to when we started podcasting. But the AL Central has been like this, generally speaking, for basically the entire existence of the AL Central. Sure. Certainly since the Twins got good again in
2002,
the early 2000s.
2001,
right?
Yeah.
And there were many years when the Twins would win 88 games, 91 games with the unbalanced schedule, which is really equivalent to like probably 84 games or 87 games or whatever, and they'd win the division by 6 games, and you'd go, were we too critical of this team for the last 6 months because they won, or were we not critical enough because the notion of first place team? And it's a weird thing to kind of hang over because, like you said, they're not playing particularly well, and it might not matter. It's going to be really difficult for even a decent team not to win this division. Like, you'll really have to go out of your way. And the Twins did that last year. Yeah. The Twins went out of their way to not win the AL Central.
Yeah.
And that's true. Maybe that sounds like I'm taking something away from Cleveland. By the end of the year, Cleveland was a solid team. Don't get me wrong. But Cleveland is not nearly at the level they were last year, right now at least.
That point, though, is one of the things that we were talking about as we go to games and as we talk to people there. By the end of the year, you want to be a good team.
Well, that's true, too.
You got that luxury in the AL Central. You don't have to – you can't – you're not going to be out of this race in May in the AL Central. You know what I mean? And so that – while we are going to be probably talking today about the struggles that the offense has and the problems that this team is experiencing that need to get fixed, it does make it a little more compelling for the full 6 months to sort of gauge – what the team is like this week as opposed to what the team is like this year, right? That I know that how the team is for the whole year is just a combination of how they were for all those weeks or something.
No, but
you want a team going into September and October, especially for this franchise.
I mean, first of all, in recent years, the Twins have gotten to the playoffs, limped their way into the playoffs a lot of time, where they're without Buxton, or they're without Donaldson, or they're without
or Morneau, or Mauer,
going back to that point. Or the year that Randy Dobnak had to start a game at Yankee Stadium,
or Liriano,
because everyone so that's one way to look at it. Is like, I guess you'd have to be very preventative to stop some of that stuff from happening.
Absolutely,
but the idea is basically, you're in the playoffs. And you're the number 2 seed or 3 seed or whatever it is, and you won, let's say, 95 games. But if you're down 3 of your 5 best players, what are you actually? And the flip side to that is maybe you're in the playoffs and you only won 85 games, and the only scenario that you got into the playoffs is because you were in the biggest horse-ass division in all of baseball. But if you added some young guys or some trade deadline pieces, or everyone's healthier than the other teams, you can be a more formidable opponent.
And the fact that your left fielder right now is hitting 173 or whatever the hell it is, that isn't necessarily what your left fielder is going to be hitting in September, because it might not be. A left fielder might have gotten better, and B, you might have a different left fielder.
Right, and I think especially with the Twins, which we're going to talk about some of their young guys, but I mean especially with the Twins, that you have guys like Kirilloff who are coming back. You have guys like Royce Lewis and Ed Julian and Matt Wallner who are going to be more in the mix here as the months come. It's going to change a lot. And this is true. I mean, like, I'm not saying baseball is unique in that sense. I mean, every sport, the version of a team that you see in the postseason doesn't just automatically match their regular season record. Like, there are some teams that are just better built for the postseason than the regular season, and vice versa. There are some teams that are better built for specific playoff matchups with other teams where they just match up super well and they can defeat them. But I think especially with baseball, because it's such a long haul, and because the numbers more so than any other sport.
And it's a daily thing. It changes day to day.
Every day. That I think there's often the biggest gap between what you look at as having been done in the regular season, what their record said they were, what their individual, where the pitching staff rank, where the lineup rank and all that, and the actual version that comes out on the field for game one of a playoff series can be vastly different. Now, it's on the Twins to actually turn that into a positive. It doesn't do you any good if you're just mediocre in the regular season and you're mediocre in the playoffs. You don't get like some brand new set of odds or something like that. But yeah, it's an interesting looming over all evaluations, particularly April and May. Yeah. When you're like, the bullpen looked bad, but how many of these guys are even going to be in the bullpen? That type of thing.
We tend to take a look at things at sort of a sabermetric perspective, which is often a very high-level perspective on this stuff.
You nerd. Right? Not me. I'm an old schooler myself.
That's right. Except when it comes to confidence. But this kind of drives home the journey itself. The day-to-day journey is a compelling drama for 162 games. And I can also say this, we're going to be talking, and we often spend time talking every episode we talk about the flaws that we see in this team, right? And it's important I like talking about those flaws, but that doesn't mean those flaws are inevitable, okay? That is always going to be a flaw from there on. You can do something about that. In fact, in particular, when we're talking about the Twins hitting, there seems to be a lot of different ways it could go. There's going to be some hope based on some of the people that we're seeing, sitting down at what they're doing in St. Paul, et cetera. Now, I would also say, before you candy coat that too much, also the stuff that's going really well isn't necessarily guaranteed to go really well the whole time either. The fact that the starting pitching seems to be absolutely clicking. Well, we are at the point now where we've started to run out of arms, so we should maybe start with that topic.
Yeah,
Gleeman?
Well, a couple things. So the Padres were in town, obviously, and the Twins bounced back pretty nicely and won 2 out of 3 against a mediocre, for now, Padres team. But I look at that lineup and even some of the pitchers that they have, and I certainly would not want to face them in a 5 or 7 game series. Although in talking to some of their beat writers, almost all of the same criticisms and worries that people have about the Twins, especially with the lineup, which is how can they have all these names and individual performers, and yet they're scoring 2 runs or 3 runs almost every game. It's a lot of the same complaints that Padres fans are getting. They happen to be in a tougher division, so there's less margin for error for them. But, after every game, you talk to the starting pitcher, and it's like, they commented, it was like, Bailey Ober was like, I wasn't at my best, but I am kind of proud of myself getting through that gauntlet that is that lineup. And it's like, that's true. But that's an example of what we're talking about, which
they're also 13th in the NL in runs per game.
Right. But that's kind of what we're talking about on a smaller scale, which is the stats that have been accumulated by those Padres hitters now and as a team now and their record right now is in no way going to be representative of the challenge they're going to present to a team in the playoffs, but they got to get to the effing playoffs first, and that's where the AL Central gives you a little bit of a head breather, start or a breather. A couple other things before we get to you mentioned it's game, I would say, fun at the ballpark. Not that it wasn't, but the weather's a little nicer. The crowds are getting bigger. They expect some very big crowds, relatively speaking, for the Cubs series
I suppose
coming up. The games, because of the style of team this now is, which they love it to not be this style completely. I mean, they intentionally did half of this style, which is to get good starting pitching and keep scores low for the other team. They haven't chosen to keep their scores low. It's just the lineup is struggling.
But the games are a lot more suspenseful when you've got those two things in place.
Doe looked after yesterday's game, because we were talking about some of the usage of the bullpen, and if they would have had a long man for this stretch, they would have gone unused for a week or 2 or whatever, which is why they sent down Winder, because they just couldn't find him regular usage. And Doe was like, it's been like 12 games since they've had anything resembling a blowout. Which, you plan for some blowouts, and so when they don't come, the last spot in the bullpen kind of gets weird. But just from
you've got Josh Winder going down,
but just from a fan enjoyment standpoint or drama standpoint, or how tense you want these games to be, like these games they constantly have the feel, because the starting pitching has been so good, because the lineup has been so inconsistent and poor overall, and because the bullpen, despite being pretty good, has some definite worry spots. There's been very few pitches this season that seem like meaningless pitches.
Right,
Do you know what I
yes.
mean?
Yeah.
I'm not saying they're all the
That's right.
highest leverage,
Right.
but there's been a lot of medium and high leverage pitches thrown, and not a lot of low leverage. Past the 6th inning or something like that, pitches thrown, and it's an interesting, like just vibe. My heart, it's probably not good for my heart. Now, also eating Chinese food every night is also not good for my heart. So I'm not overly concerned about that.
Right,
But
yes.
yeah, I don't know. It's a good time to be at the ballpark. We're going to talk 3 big topics.
Yeah.
I won't even say them. We'll get into it. But before that, speaking of being at the ballpark, we'll talk about our first sponsors here. But they came out with our pal Soda Stick, soda like Minnesota.
Right.
Came out with the Lando Rakes
Yes.
T-shirt. To the Twins' new Homer celebration.
That's
It's to
right.
play off
Yep,
that,
yep.
and they're working on a
Land O'Rakes fishing vest.
yeah. They're working on.
Soda Stick is not giving a Land O'Rakes fishing vest. Just FYI.
Yeah, this is just a shirt.
It turns out they've had Land O'Rakes shirts for a while, and they've got a new color that's coming out,
Okay.
and they sold out of them. But they've got a new batch coming in literally today.
Okay.
Today they've got the Land O'Rakes.
And they're working on a new Buxton off the trucker.
Yeah.
The buck truck thing.
We've got a little
T-shirt.
sketch of what the design might look
Yeah,
like. It's
I'm
gonna
looking
be
at it
good.
right now. I like it.
Yeah.
And then they just have all the normal good stuff that they have. Not just baseball, but all
Yes.
Minnesota sports.
Yes.
SodaStickCo.com, or just Google Soda Stick and you can get right to it.
The fact that they already ran out of the Land O'Rakes tells you, you're going to want to get in there. You're going to want to get your name in there now.
And if you use the promo code Gleeman at checkout,
you get 15%
15% off any order, whether it's new stuff, whether it's old stuff, whether it's restocks or what. So SodaStickCo.com. We also wanted to talk about HelloFresh. I saw you cook something HelloFresh the other day.
Yes, I did.
HelloFresh, here's how HelloFresh works. It's a meal kit. It's America's #1 meal kit.
Yes.
They tell me. You go on their website, and they have tons, a big menu each week that always changes every week.
Right.
And not only are there a lot of options, but there are vegetarian options,
yes, right.
family options for kids who are a little pickier.
Fit options. Yes.
Yeah,
You're right.
heavy
right.
meat eater
Yeah,
option
that's
with
right.
burgers and
Right.
steaks and stuff. You can basically handpick your menu in advance every week, or you can just choose a default and have it go every week.
Right.
They send you
A box.
a box that has everything packaged perfectly, whether it's dry ice, whether it's pre-portioned vegetables, whether it's what.
And it's broken down within that box. There's different little bags. So you just grab the bag, and this is the burger bag.
Right.
Now you get everything.
There's no shopping required.
Right. You've got the stuff that you're going to use to make the sauce for the burger, and you've got the bun, and you've got the condiments, and
It's
everything.
like
is
you have
right
your
there
own
ready
sous
for it.
chef. They did all the mise en place
That's exactly
before you
right.
got
Yeah,
there.
that's a good point.
Can you tell I watch a lot of Top Chef? And for doofuses like me, or even for people who actually know what they're doing in the kitchen, like John and Chrissy, they have a recipe, but it's really step-by-step instructions with pictures, which is very helpful for someone like me, where they say, slice some ginger, and I go, what is ginger? But there's a picture of it. It really helps. John cooks up HelloFresh all the time, and it's really good and very Instagrammable or Twitterable.
Yes, it is. Yeah,
John really
nice job of it.
sends all these pictures of pork chops, and people are drooling over them. So our listeners can get a special deal at HelloFresh. You go to HelloFresh.com/Gleeman16, the number 16, and use the code Gleeman16. And the reason it's 16 is you get 16 free meals plus free shipping. So that's HelloFresh.com/Gleeman16.
Yep.
And then use the promo code Gleeman16. America's #1 meal kit, and you can start cooking at home too.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to talk about Tyler Mahle first?
I think we should probably go in reverse chronological order here. Yeah, let's start with Tyler Mahle first,
and then we'll get to the roster moves and hitting
that's right.
changes and all that. Okay, that's fair. So Tyler Mahle is done for the year, and possibly much or all of next year. Likely done as a Twin, although that's not necessarily ruled out. We can get to that in a second. I asked Falvey about that yesterday. We talked to Baldelli, we talked to Falvey, we talked to Tyler Mahle yesterday, just to get a sense of the situation. The basic version is, well, we can go back further, but they acquired Mahle on August 2nd last year at the deadline. They gave up 3 good prospects for him, which we can talk about those guys in a second too. The idea was, he's going to be, your number 2 starter, frontline starter.
He's going to be leading this team into the postseason in 2022.
The plan for last year was he's going to join Sonny Gray and Joe Ryan atop this rotation. Right. Not dissimilar to their plan for Pablo Lopez this time around, except that seems to be going better. Instead, and he had been on the IL with the Reds within the month before the deadline with shoulder problems, but had come back and made either 2 or 3 starts and looked pretty good, and the Twins had exchanged medical information with all them and all that. They make a big trade for him. They pay, not a crazy price to get him, but I think it was not a discount price, I would say. I think it was
they stepped up and paid the freight.
Right. And he made a couple of starts, looked pretty decent. Very easy to see what they saw in him and why they tried to get him. And then he left the start with he was throwing 85 miles an hour with what they called fatigue at the time. Then he takes a few, and he claims each time, which this will be a pattern as we describe this, but he claimed afterward, I feel fine. I don't really know what was going on, but I'm fine. He rests a little bit. He comes back. He makes one more start, and he lasts, 2 innings, I think, in that start. Right. Once again, velocity drops from 93, 94 to 87. Comes out. They place him on the IL with, shoulder fatigue, shoulder strain, whatever it is. That's it for him last season.
Right.
Then he spends the offseason really trying to work on that shoulder. And
it's not actually totally clear that he did. I mean,
that's literally all he did offseason. He went to Driveline to work on his shoulders.
No, the Driveline, he wasn't working on the shoulder. That was the point. He was working
I talked to him yesterday about it.
No, in spring training, he claimed he did not go to Driveline to work on the shoulder.
No, they're not a medical facility. I'm saying he threw throughout the offseason to build up strength in his shoulder. Okay. Right. He went to Driveline to try to tweak his slider.
Right, okay.
But my point is, he didn't show up to spring training having not thrown like he did the year before.
Sure, absolutely.
He spent the entire offseason trying to build up his shoulder. Okay. That was the entire goal. The new trainer, Nick Paparesta.
And apparently it worked.
I mean, it did work.
Yeah, right, yeah.
His shoulder was not a problem.
I agree.
At any point during spring training, during the early part of the season, which is maybe what makes this all the more frustrating, which is he looked good in spring training. The velocity, which I personally obsessed about, was solid. There were a few throws or a few innings where it would drop a few miles an hour, but A, that's common for many pitchers, and B, Mahle specifically is someone in a lot of starts who will start out at 92 and kind of build to 93, 94, sometimes 95. Had a good spring with that tweak slider and good velocity and was fully healthy and started the season pitching pretty well. 3-something ERA through, a handful of starts and good velocity and all that. And then all of a sudden, very similar sight, which is, the 4th inning, his last start a week ago or whatever it was.
Sounds right.
Velocity dropped from, 93, 94 to 90 and then 89 and then back up to 92 and then 90. And he finished the inning. He struck out the last pitch he threw struck out a batter.
Yeah.
It was 90. Right. A 90 mile an hour fastball struck someone out. Got back to the dugout, didn't come back out. And again, afterward said, well, I don't even think I'm going to get an MRI. I'm fine.
But this time it wasn't the shoulder. It was
the elbow. Right. Which is...
Or a forearm strain. Is that what were they calling it a forearm strain at that point?
No. They were
saying it's the elbow?
They were... Well, not even. They were saying it was... They were more saying it was, hey, it was this part of the arm. And the good news is that's not typically where an elbow ligament damage is and all that stuff. And Mahle, of course, has a tremendous poker face. And I've... Yet to hear him, he's been hurt now 3 times in 6 months with the Twins, whatever, but I've yet to hear him say I'm hurt other than yesterday when it was announced he's going to have Tommy John surgery. And so it put the Twins, I think, in somewhat of a difficult spot just because how can you rely on you can only go off what a player is telling you about their health. Right. You can't read minds, obviously. Now, you can put them through an MRI and all that. But I think there's a lot more gray area with a lot more pitchers, especially veteran pitchers. There are guys who are great pitchers. There are other guys in that clubhouse who are top pitchers at their peak right now who have, partial tearing or just wear and tear on a ligament or whatever. And so the idea that we'll just put him through an MRI and you'll see if it's torn or not, it's not like something that happens on one pitch generally.
Sure.
Now, when you do tear a ligament, a UCL, ulnar collateral ligament, which is the Tommy John surgery elbow ligament. It's generally because you've kind of been heading that way for a while. I think of it kind of like a worn down tire is more likely than to pop, sort of.
Got it, yeah.
Now, once in a while, you just drive over a nail and your tire pops.
Right, yes,
but that's generally not how.
That would be maybe if you fell on it weird or something like that.
Yeah,
right?
or
right.
whatever. Right. Or, you threw 135 pitches in an outing or something like that. You just put undue stress on it. But for the last week, basically, he got multiple opinions from, team doctors, outside the team doctors, specialists, all that stuff, and presented with the options were, A, you could get a PRP injection, platelet-rich plasma injection in your elbow, rest and rehab for however many weeks or months it would be, and then kind of make one go at
least a 60-day thing, because he's on the 60-day IL.
Well, right. It wouldn't be till that would have been early July at the absolute earliest. And then try to do this thing again. But most likely, and some pitchers, I remember Masahiro Tanaka, who killed the Twins while he was with the Yankees, had great season with the Yankees. He had a partially torn UCL the entire time, and he was fine. I mean, that is possible. But the most likely scenario, unfortunately, is you rest, you rehab, you take 2-3 months, you come back, you make a start or two, and you're right back where you started, except you've lost that time.
Right.
And then so the other option, which is the option that he chose, was let's get it cleaned up now. Let's get the surgery now. Let's go under the knife. You're done for this season. You're an impending free agent, which complicates the situation, which means, I guess the motivations for the two sides are much different. Like, I mean, the Twins, they're not going to tell a guy who has a torn UCL. Why do I keep saying UCLA?
I don't know. They're torn away from the Pac-10.
Yeah. A torn UCLA is like Bill Walton when he was on shrooms. That's what people called him. They're not going to say to him, hey, we only have you for the next 3 months. We just need you to keep pitching, obviously. But the motivations are a little different. But he opted for just the standard surgery. It sounds like the Reds doctor, who's Keith Meister, I think his name is, who does a ton of these surgeries, is going to do the surgery. Now, he was with the Reds, obviously, so he knows him, but he's like a specialist for Tommy John. It sounds like they're not 100% sure whether it will be the full-scale Tommy John or the brace, which Maeda had, which is, in theory, supposed to be more of a 9 to 12-month recovery versus like a 12 to 15-month recovery. But either way, he's going to be a free agent. And the frustrating part, I think, in talking,
and I mean, it's which one he goes is kind of interesting in terms of his future too, because it's a lot different between getting back in May of this year or May of next year or September of next year, especially as a free agent hitting the market.
Yeah, I mean, you can
if you're not going to be coming back till September of next year. Well, then you're kind of looking for like a Michael Pineda kind of deal in the offseason. You're looking for a 2-year deal, something like that.
If you're coming back in the middle of next season, you could do one of two things. You could just, this offseason, sign a 1-year deal for not a lot of money, incentive-laden maybe, and with the hope that you're going to contribute in the second half. Or you could remain a free agent, get to a point where you're ready, and then throw for teams in July and hope to snag maybe a little bit better deal. He's probably going to be in a spot where he's going to have to sign a multi-year deal. We can talk in a second if the Twins might be interested in doing something like that. They basically did it with Chris Paddock recently. But I think what came through talking to everyone involved in this is the kind of double frustration of, A, we really did like this guy.
Right.
And we did what I would say was an uncharacteristically aggressive trade for him, which I think was, as a big picture idea, was a good thing.
Yes, I agree.
Given where they were in August, which was in first place. And
they leaned into what we wanted them to lean into. Yep.
But they feel like, and they feel like they saw glimpses, but they never really got a chance to have any sort of consistent, more than a start or two at a time impact from him. And because it was so murky from a health standpoint, where it's not like he just immediately needed shoulder surgery.
Right.
He was saying he was fine, and they were going to rest and rehab. And then it was, he came back. It really kind of was so unsettled within the rotation that you were almost having to kind of
you can't really have an alternate plan or make you have to at least allow that he's going to be involved in
Right.
making 30.
You had to manage around
really good starts.
Yes.
Right.
And because he felt good, like we said, all offseason, and because he went to Driveline and he showed up to spring training with a new slider and good velocity and all that, there was no reason for them not to plan for him, although they did start with
they actually
6
did. Yeah, right.
and really 7
Right.
major league caliber starters with Ober and Varlin, in part because of Mahle, but also in part because of Maeda,
Right.
and in part just because they wanted to trade for Pablo Lopez. But then the second, so that was frustrating. Just they felt like we made a trade, we targeted
And
a guy
it
we
could
liked,
not have gone worse.
right, and we just
Right.
never got any sort of sense of what he could be. And then the doubly frustrating part for Mahle, I think, was his shoulder feels fine. Now, he always says he feels fine, but I think there was some evidence of that in his performance. And, you know, I'm sure that on some level,
shoulder was strong enough to blow that blow that
well,
UCL.
right. That's the thing. I mean, like, this is going to be, you know, Dr. Gleeman, the college dropout here, but on some level, I'm sure an elbow and a shoulder are connected for a major league pitcher. But I don't think this is an example. I don't think you can just look at this and say, well, they got a guy who was damaged goods. He was immediately hurt, and now he blew out his arm, and he needs surgery. Well, yeah, that is sort of what happened.
Yeah, that's what happened.
But the initial injury, the reason that you would call him damaged goods,
Right.
if you want to call him that, if you want to call another human being that, was fixed. Now, would the shoulder have lasted 30 starts? Well,
We don't know.
obviously,
Right.
anybody who listens to this knows I'm skeptical. But you know, it's not as if. Look, I love to pat myself on the back for anything. God knows that. But predicting any pitcher will get injured is a pretty decent bet over a long enough timeline.
Right.
And B, I thought the shoulder was going to be a problem. Now, the fact that the elbow became a problem, you can fold that into an overall skepticism about Tyler Mahle.
Yeah.
Sure. But they're not as connected as I think you might assume. And I think that was the doubly frustrating part, which is we got this guy, Nick Paparesta worked with him, and he did all this stuff on his own. We got this guy to a point where he was back to throwing 93, 94. He looked solid. The shoulder felt good. And then the other thing blew out.
Right, yeah.
And I don't know. You know, that's life in the pitching acquisition game, I guess. And nobody knows that more than the Twins.
Yep, you're right.
Let's see. A couple other just notes, domino effects from this, I guess, sort of. You can no longer give him a qualifying. I mean, you can, but they won't give him
Or
a
a
qualifying
percent,
offer.
right.
And that is a factor in any sort of trade like this. We've actually talked about this. If you look at the biggest moves the Twins have made for starting pitchers under this regime, it's Lopez, Sonny Gray, and Mahle.
Right.
And the two of those three, Gray and Lopez, had 2 full seasons under team control.
Yes.
They acquired them before a season, and they had 2 seasons. Mahle had basically one and a half seasons.
Right.
And in both cases, because if you're traded mid-season and it's your final season under team control, you're ineligible for the qualifying offer. But if you're traded with 1.5 seasons left or before the 2 seasons, then the qualifying offer can be made. And they definitely factor that in. We've talked about the Sonny Gray thing looking like a nice piece of business, whether or not they keep Sonny Gray, who's also an impending free agent. But the idea with Gray is they traded essentially a late first-round pick, Chase Petty, for Sonny Gray. They're going to get 2 good seasons out of Sonny Gray. Then, well, right, knock on wood. I mean, I'd say they're already basically at that point from a value standpoint. Then they're going to make Sonny Gray the qualifying offer. Either he accepts it, returns on a 1-year, $20 million deal, which great.
Right.
Or
Now
he
we get 3 good
declines it.
seasons out of him.
And if he declines it, and if he signs elsewhere, you get essentially that draft pick back. You cancel out the price you paid, roughly. Now, you could have made that same play with Mahle.
Yep.
And it's, one draft pick is not going to cancel out the 3 prospects that they gave up, but it canceled out a chunk
One
of
of
that.
them.
I mean, it's a factor in the valuation of these trades, and now that's off the table,
Yep.
essentially. I mean, obviously, he would accept a 1-year qualifying offer.
Of course he would.
So that takes that component out of it, which is unfortunate just in terms of the long-term valuation of this trade. In the immediate, it essentially makes Bailey Ober a full-time member of this rotation. He's in absolutely no danger of being pushed out, even if Maeda were to return relatively soon, which I'm skeptical about, although I got some information on that yesterday that we can talk about too. And it means that Varland is now connected to Maeda instead of Varland actually joined the rotation to replace Mahle. So he's
Varland, who had maybe his best start as a major leaguer on Tuesday.
I mean, Louis Varland has looked good. He's made 8 starts. I'd say he's looked good in 6 or 7 of them, basically, which is pretty good for any pitcher. The trade itself, and everybody's all worked up about Spencer Steer because he's playing in the majors. Spencer Steer has not been good for the Reds. That doesn't mean he won't be good for the Reds, but he's 25, and I think he's got a 90 career OPS plus or something like that. He's so far been closer to a Kyle Farmer than this guy's our long-term third baseman.
It might be nice right now when you've got a spot
he'd
at
probably
third
be playing third base for them. Undeniably,
it
would be nice to have him right now.
Right.
And actually, I do think I was pretty high on Steer. Just overall, I think he's going to be a good, solid player. I don't know that there's like, oh my God, I can't believe we traded Spencer Steer type of upside, but you never know. Christian Encarnacion Strand, however, who at the time was the second, headliner that they traded.
I would say he was perceived to be the headliner in that trade. Don't you think?
Go back and read it. He wasn't.
Yeah.
A lot of people had him third in that trade.
Right. Okay.
Go back and read the midseason rankings. He wasn't anywhere near Steer.
No, but by the time they that trade, he was the one of the. Listen, they both had a lot of steam because they both had really good years.
Right.
But I think, I'm talking last year, of the two that at the very least amongst the prospect hounds I knew, he was the one that hurt more so than Steer.
I think you're. I think this is a.
You think
apocryphal. Tale.
Okay.
I'm not saying people weren't high on him, but I don't remember any rankings or any even write-ups of the trade. People were obsessed with Steer because Steer was thriving at AAA, and the perception was he could have stepped into the lineup. If you want to say Encarnacion Strand at the time had more upside,
that's exactly right.
But keep in mind, he had never even gotten to AAA at that point. He had just gotten to AA when they traded. Now, since then, your overall point ends up being correct anyway. Despite the nitpicking by your incredibly cranky but handsome co-host, he's just been on fire this season. He was good for the Reds in the Reds system last year, but not any better than he had been in the Twins. But he had crushed for the Twins too. I mean, he hit 400 in junior college. He transferred to Oklahoma State. He hit 400 at Oklahoma State. The Twins drafted him in the 5th round and felt immediately like they got a steal. Crushed the low minors, crushed AA, gets traded, and now I think he's got 7 homers in 16 games at AAA or something like that. They could use him too, although he hasn't been called up yet. I think most likely he's going to end up as a first baseman DH, which, as we're going to talk about in a minute here with Jose Miranda, does end up mattering, especially in terms of the Twins' plans. But that's the one that right now looks like it could hurt the most. The third player they traded was a left-handed pitcher named Steve Hajar, who has since been traded from Cincinnati to Cleveland.
Right.
And they didn't get like a lot for him. And now he's shut down. He hasn't thrown a pitch this season because of a shoulder injury. And he had some injuries before the trade was with the Twins too. So, if I'm ranking him now in terms of 10 years from now, what's the one that's going to sting the most from this trade? It's probably Encarnacion Strand.
Yep.
Steer and Hajar, although all three have the potential to sting. Although, let's be honest, it's possible that none of them truly sting.
That's true.
But we'll see.
But in any case, no matter what they get, they're getting more than the Twins got from Tyler Mahle.
Well, I mean, not to steal Derek Wetmore, or old friend Derek Wetmore, who has had the good sense to retire from baseball.
There's a
non-zero chance that the whatever 0.8 WAR Mahle gave the Twins. I mean, Mahle made 9 starts for the Twins with like a 3-something ERA. There was some value in that. Now, like we talked about, it was a weird situation, so that removes some of the value. I mean, Spencer Steer has not been an above replacement level player yet.
Probably not.
Hajar's been traded and is hurt. Now, I'm pretty sure Encarnacion Strand's going to get to the majors.
Pretty sure the Twins would hit a little bit. Take back that trade.
Well, that's
all right.
Absolutely. Okay. They would have taken that trade the moment Mahle walked off the mound, having thrown 85 miles an hour last year. I think it was safe to say they would undo that trade. Then the one other thing that we mentioned, and then we'll get to some other stuff, but the idea of a like Paddock style, yes, you're hurt, but we'd like to keep you type of trade. Now the difference is, yes, Paddock had Tommy John surgery. It was the second one.
And it was in May.
Right. But the difference is they had control over Paddock
for 2 years.
For 2 more years via arbitration.
If they wanted it. Yeah.
Right. He wasn't an impending free agent. And so they could approach, I tried to poke around about this a little bit, and everyone basically told me, let the guy have the surgery first, and let's see how that goes and see how he feels, and we can maybe broach this later. But it's not implausible. Like you mentioned, the Michael Pineda trade is a blueprint for that.
Right.
The Paddock deal is sort of a blueprint for that, but not really. It would have to be kind of a 1+1 contract minimally, which is to say it's a 2-year deal, but the first year of that deal, it's kind of providing a home for you to rehab, and maybe you throw a little bit in August and September or something.
I had 2 thoughts on that as we talked about it yesterday at the game as the Mahle news broke and such. We found out about right. Yeah, it's a lot different situation than Paddock, because Paddock not only was under contract last year, he was under, like you said, he's under team control
via arbitration
for 2 more years if they wanted it, or they could just not. They could not offer him any arbitration. You could have just said, "We're going to cut bait right here."
Yes,
right.
Which is what he wanted to avoid.
Which is 2 years more than they have.
It's why the Twins had some level of leverage there, which they don't have really with Mahle, other than the injury. I mean, obviously.
Correct. My thoughts on it were, are we at the point where you're doing that because you're like, okay, we're kind of writing him off for 2024, but 2025 we'll have him coming back.
Right.
I mean, yeah, but
what's this even going to look like in 2025?
Right. You've got a lot of you might have a lot of options in 2025. Like they aren't as pitching poor as they were at that point with that. Now, on the other hand, it could be that one of the reasons they extended Paddock, and that could mean they would also try to do something like this with Mahle, is they still want to get something for that trade.
Well,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like yes, it's a sunk cost, but
tell your brain that.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like it's hard to convince yourself. Like logically, believe me, the Twins know the concept of a sunk cost and all this stuff.
Right. Yeah.
They've all gone to business school. But yeah, there is a little something.
There's something like, we did like this guy. Yeah. Like it wasn't just he was the only guy available. It was also, we do like him. We saw how hard he worked. He got the shoulder right.
Yeah, and by the way, to be clear, while I think his, stonewall face and refusal to even acknowledge that he was at all injured each time put them in something of a difficult situation, like managerially or roster-wise or just in general.
Sure.
To be clear, no one that I've talked to has said a bad word about Tyler Mahle as a person or a teammate or a work ethic and all that stuff. So, yeah, I mean, they like him. They went untraded for him. They like him as a pitcher. They like him just fine as a person, all that stuff. It's very strange to try to figure out, like, what would this type of contract look like, right? Because the first year of the contract is only setting up the second year of the contract. And if he had the second year... What was that
Pineda deal? Was that 2 years, $11 million, like $2 million the first year and $9 million the second year, something like that?
That's the initial...
That was the initial
contract. They signed him as a free agent. Then they re-signed him to a 2-year, $20 million deal. Yeah, I think it was like $210. And the first one was like $1.5 million, and the second one was like 8.5 or something. With, obviously, you provide the ability to rehab under your umbrella and all that stuff, which is valuable too. The tricky part of that, though, is when you're talking about free agency, you say, okay, we want to do a 2-year deal. The first year is just kind of paying you to stay here, $1 million. And then you try to figure out, well, what's the price tag for the second year? But then you have to say to yourself, well, if he were just a free agent coming off Tommy John surgery and maybe hadn't even pitched at that point, come 2 off seasons from now, what's he getting as a free agent anyway? He's probably getting a 1-year deal for, I don't know, $8 million, $10 million, something like that. Yeah. I mean, he's not going to get a 3-year, $45 million deal at that point. And so what are you, from the Twins' perspective, unless you're just super high on Tyler Mahle, which maybe they still are, you can't just say, oh, let's give him a 2-year, $15 million deal. We'll give him $2 million to rehab and then $13 million 2 years from now. First of all, he might provide no value 2 years from now. And second of all, is that really giving you a leg up in terms of what he or a similar pitcher would cost coming off elbow surgery 2 off seasons from now? So yeah, it's tricky. Now, if you're Mahle, it's a question of how much faith do you have in your ability to come back maybe on a 1-year deal elsewhere, put together a full healthy season, re-hit free agency at age 30 probably, and then get, a 4 or 5 year deal. I would say that just given his track record, almost no matter how well he pitches
next year for the second half of the year,
or even the year after
right,
that, if it's like a 1-1, people aren't going to be lining up to give him $100 million, I don't think. But
yeah.
So that's part of the
it
leverage. It
feels like
equation.
his payday, which was going to be this year, is going to be delayed at least 2 years.
Yes.
Right. The people are going to want to see a full year of health. Now, the idea of a 2-year deal, one of the things that allows you is you don't have to try and scramble to be back in May. You can actually, hey, let's make sure that we get this thing right.
Yeah,
your
motivations are more aligned, team and player, because
that's right.
One side is not trying to rush the other back.
Right.
One side is not trying to play long term versus short term. All that stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just looked up. The Pineda one was 210, so it was
$1 million
two
and then
8,
9
2 and
million.
8.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Before we get to the other stuff.
Yeah.
Let's talk about our next batch of sponsors, BetterHelp.
Yep.
BetterHelp.com. The idea is if you're interested in getting some therapy or some help on whatever it is,
Yep.
but you're saying it's a pain to find a therapist.
Right.
It's a pain from an insurance standpoint. Maybe you're saying, I don't want to leave the house. I don't want to do this in person. Whatever it is, and I can sympathize with that.
It's expensive.
BetterHelp, it's also expensive. There's just a lot of barriers for entry. And BetterHelp, if you want to do a video chat with somebody, you can do that. If you don't even want to be on camera, you do a phone call. If you're like me and you hate being on the phone, you can do a live chat where you just type with the person. They'll set it up however you would like.
If you don't mesh with your therapist, you can get another therapist.
There's no
got a lot of
long-term
them.
commitment or anything. You can get matched up with real therapists who are specialists with whatever you need help with, and they can do it in a timely manner and an easy manner, and they can set it up to fit what you're looking for.
You know what the barrier is? You just got to fill out a brief questionnaire. Fill out a brief questionnaire. You get matched with a licensed therapist, and then, like you said, we can switch the therapist anytime for no additional charge. So
here's what you need to do. You go to betterhelp.com/Gleeman, and you'll get 10% off your first month to give it a try. That's BetterHelp, HELP, betterhelp.com/Gleeman. Let's see. Next
second sponsor is MyBookie. We approve of gambling.
You don't speak for me. They won't let me into church anymore after that. MLB is back in full swing. MyBookie is going to be your one-stop shop for all your betting needs with a wide range of betting options, including money lines, run totals, futures. MyBookie gives you plenty of ways to bet on your favorite teams and players.
You can also take advantage of a brand new MyBookie money bag, which gives you the chance to secure a bet on your favorite team or player at insanely boosted odds. You just sign up today. You go to MyBookie and you use promo code Gleeman to secure a first deposit bonus of up to $1,000. It's simple. Deposit $200 and play with $300 instantly. Just use the promo code Gleeman to claim your bonus.
So if you're a baseball fan looking to add some excitement to the new season, look no further than MyBookie. Sign up now. Get ready to experience the thrill of baseball betting like never before. Bet anything, anytime, anywhere. MyBookie.
That's it.
Okay. So let's get on to the, I don't want to say healthy players, but the non-Tommy John injured players. Because there's a couple key roster
moves. Yeah.
Machinations. Is that the word?
Yeah, that's good.
Machinations?
Machinations?
I don't know. You ever realize in the middle of a sentence that you've only ever read a word or written a word and not said a word?
Right.
It happens to me a lot, I guess, as a writer, where I'm
Absolutely.
like, I'm about to say a word, and then I think to myself, have I only read this in a book, or have I only ever typed this, and can I find a synonym that I know how to pronounce?
Detritus.
Detritus is your version of that? I'm trying to think of a good example of this. I can't.
That one hit me, I don't know, a couple weeks ago or something, where I was like, is it detritus? Is it detritus? I didn't know exactly.
Who knows?
Yeah. I think it's detritus.
Here's what I've learned, though, about that, which I do stress out about that type of thing. That's the type of thing I think about a lot. Here's what I've learned. The person you're saying it to
also has no idea.
It's usually a coin flip. And also, if you say it wrong, even if they're pretty sure you're saying it wrong, they will have enough doubt in their head that they'll go, have I been saying that wrong this whole time? He said it really weird. Anyway. Okay. So we can kind of lump these together in a way because I do think it's a little bit of a similar situation. So you have essentially the Larnach sent down, Kirilloff active or called up situation. and then the Farmer back from the IL and Miranda sent down situation. And the similar part of that to me is Miranda and Larnach as former top prospects, still relatively young and relatively inexperienced major leaguers, but they each have 150 something games in the majors. Guys who are still potentially long-term core pieces for the Twins or building blocks for the Twins, but you're a little less sure of that, or a lot less sure of that than you were 6 months ago, 12 months ago.
Slow starts, and it's middle of May.
Right.
This is when changes are made. Right.
Now, obviously, Kirilloff is much different than Kyle Farmer, and that's where the differences is. So I guess let's continue our reverse chronological, because you've chosen that choose your own adventure. So now we turn to page 112 on choose your own. Did you used to read those? I was going to say as a kid.
I love those.
You were like as a kid in like the 40s. So did they have those when you were a kid?
Oh, absolutely, they have those. Okay. Yeah, we love those.
Choose your own adventure.
I think my generation was the one that popularized those in the first place. Yeah,
they had them. You guys used to write them on like what, tree bark? And then,
that's right. Yeah, chiseled them into stone.
On the inside of your cave walls or whatever. Okay, so let's talk Miranda and Farmer, and I guess Castro in that first. So this news broke mid-podcast for anybody who says Patreon subscriber. Right. We were talking with Dan Hayes, and about halfway through that episode, John goes, "Hey, I got some news."
Hey, I finally get to interrupt this pointless discussion.
No, this incredible debate. How dare you son of a... and the surprise there was, it was clear that Farmer was on the verge of being activated. He had the previous day, he was in the clubhouse. We talked to him. He looks good. He feels good. He had worked out, gone through an extensive
workout. He played last week with St. Paul. Yeah,
you saw him hit a homer.
And then did not go on the road with St. Paul. Right. I was in the clubhouse.
That was the real tell. Right, which is, he doesn't need more at-bats because he'd be in Columbus. He'd be in Indianapolis. Whatever. So the decision point there was, we want Kyle Farmer back. Do we... you have to clear a roster spot for him. It was going to be a position player. It was going to be an infielder. Right. Now, there were a couple other options, but I think ultimately it definitely came down to, do we take the most straightforward, cleanest, uncomplicated route of just sending down Willie Castro, who was the last guy on the team coming out of spring training, has been the least used position player, and not to be mean to Willie Castro, but is the most expendable player on the entire roster. He's a replacement level player. Basically.
He wasn't supposed to be there.
Right. And he has minor league options left, which means you can just send him to AAA. No harm, no foul. I think at that time he had 49 plate appearances in 36 games or something, or 30-something games, whatever it was. That would have been the, least rearranging of anything roster-wise. Farmer comes back. Miranda stays as the primary third baseman, but perhaps gets pushed a little more for playing time by Farmer, who continues to bounce around the infield in the role that he kind of began the season.
Correct.
What they instead opted to do...
And we both sort of thought that was going to...
I assume that because I always assumed they're going to take the kind of depth-preserving, least... flipping over an apple cart type of situation.
And there's certainly enough guys on that roster they could use a day off occasionally between Polanco and Correa and Miranda, who had been starting almost every game up till last week.
I also just am generally not a big believer in Willie Castro, so that played a part in it. Obviously, they believe in him more or he wouldn't be on the team. What they instead decided to do was keep Willie Castro and send down Jose Miranda. Now, just to be clear, Jose Miranda, from a performance standpoint, is absolutely deserving of a demotion to AAA.
Sure.
He had been...
So was Willie Castro.
Well, but he wasn't, I would argue, deserving of a promotion to begin with. But Miranda has been genuinely terrible this season on both sides of the ball.
Yeah.
At the time of the demotion, I looked, his OPS ranked 167th out of 178 qualified hitters in the major leagues. And you could maybe argue his defense was slightly worse than that even.
Maybe.
It wasn't much better, certainly. And I think another thing that played into it was a lot of times for a guy coming off a solid rookie season and he's 24 and this is his first full season, you can say, who cares? It's a bad 6 weeks, whatever. But two things. One, he also struggled down the stretch last year, which they attributed to fatigue and just full season and all that stuff. But he was pretty bad for the last 6 weeks last year, too. So it was more like 80 games of struggle as opposed to 35 games of struggle. And then the other thing that I think ultimately is why this was very similar to Larnach, they felt like he was getting more lost
Right.
not better. They felt like the at-bat quality was getting worse. They felt
The trend was not up.
Right.
The trend was down.
They, I think, worried with Larnach and again with Miranda that they had gotten to a point where they weren't going to snap out of it
Right. They were
without
doing more harm than good at this level.
some kind of reset, which is how a couple people phrased it when they sent down Miranda. And so I don't know what I would have done. I expected them to send down Castro.
I did too.
I have no problem with what they instead chose to do. My actual assumption, and we talked about this with Dan actually, my assumption was they were going to send down Castro, and then that would buy Miranda essentially 20 days. Because, as we're now going to mix in here, Royce Lewis began a rehab assignment last night at Double-A as a third baseman.
Yes.
And he's going to play some short too, but I expect him to play a lot of third base. He's going to play initially at Double-A, then probably next week he'll move up to St. Paul Triple-A. The window for a rehab assignment is a maximum of 20 days. Now they can do at the end of those 20 days what they did with Kirilloff, which is activate him from the injured list and then just option him to Triple-A. And given back-to-back torn ACLs and the long layoff and stuff like that, I think that's very likely. But that's kind of why I thought send down Castro, give Miranda 3 more weeks, essentially, to get your S together.
Right.
And if you can't, then early June, first week of June, let's say, we can make that same swap that they did now, except it's Miranda going down and Royce Lewis rejoining the team and taking over at third base. They decided not to wait on that, and instead now it's going to be Kyle Farmer as your primary third baseman for minimally 3 more weeks, 20 days or something, 19 more days, I guess, which, again, not the worst thing. He's definitely going to be an upgrade defensively.
Yes.
And it's going to be hard for him to not be as good or better offensively just because of how bad Miranda is. But,
doesn't have the ceiling, but has a higher floor.
Yeah, I mean, when they acquired Farmer, it was to be a placeholder shortstop, and they hoped, if they were able to re-sign Correa or sign a different star shortstop, that he would be like a high-end utility guy.
Right.
Playing him as an everyday third baseman, I remember having this conversation about Nick Punto about 20 years ago with you, which is, as an everyday third baseman, Nick Punto is no good.
Right.
As a 300 at-bat per year super utility guy who can fill in at third base or fill in wherever, he's a really useful player, and I think that's where Farmer is. Farmer should play every day against lefties because he has a really good track record against lefties. He's a right-handed hitter. It's the every day against righties part that gets a little tricky. I think you may see some Willie Castro, who's a switch hitter there, can be a left-handed bat against righties. I don't think it's going to be a platoon. I expect Farmer to play a lot more.
Right.
But you can spot Willie Castro as a left-handed bat against some righties. But the problem there is
you could have done that this whole time, though. You could have spotted Willie Castro.
The problem there is, yes, Willie Castro swings a bat left-handed. I wouldn't really say he hits left-handed.
Yeah, right.
That's the problem with a lot of this stuff situationally. So that's where they're at third base.
If they had somebody that could play third base competently,
like Spencer Steer, you say?
Yeah,
Christian
they would not have made this. Or even if they would have thought Miranda wasn't hurting himself,
right?
But this move suggests they thought he was hurting himself. That this was as done. Listen, the needs of the team have to be weighed in on this, and this team might be a better team with Miranda, even as much as he's struggling up here and Castro down there. But at some point, you take a look and go, is it going to be that much better? And we got to get this guy on track. Like if we're going to be back to the earlier conversation, if we're going to be where we want to be in September, Miranda has to be right. And that's one of the ways that we are going to be better. We have to have an answer at third base.
Full circle, John Brink. This is why he's a radio professional, podcast professional. Excuse me. So I would say the depth chart now at third base is Farmer first, Castro second. I asked about this, so this is the only reason I'm laying this out. Donovan Solano is third. I wouldn't expect to see him much, but something resembling an emergency
could happen.
Yeah,
sure.
I mean, he has played third base. I think just at his age, he's not a great. I mean, he hasn't been great at first base. And then I thought, well, maybe this is an opportunity for Nick Gordon to be a left-handed bat.
I'm glad you asked.
Yes, and I was told not going to happen. If we get into the 11th inning and pinch hitters start coming off the bench and we're scrambling defensively, maybe he finds himself over at third base. But for whatever reason, rightly or wrongly, and I get it, they don't trust Nick Gordon to play third base. Nick Gordon, Kyle Farmer platoon which is, by the way, what they briefly did at second base to replace Polanco, can be pretty productive offensively.
I'm with you.
But if they don't trust Gordon to play third base defensively, then it's kind of a moot point. Let's see. A couple other things about this. So
that would have been slick. I would have liked that if he could do that. I mean, I get that he can't, but boy, he seems like somebody who could. So it just kind of bums me out. Yeah.
It is weird to. Well, it's not like they play him at shortstop much, but it is weird to be a shortstop and to not be able to play third base, which brings us to Royce Lewis. Who we mentioned, but Royce Lewis, career-long shortstop. First of all, let's focus on the really positive news of this, which is that he's recovered well enough from a second torn ACL to be well ahead of schedule, by the way. They said 12 months. It's been, 9 months? 9.5 months, something like that, roughly. Yeah. I mean, when he initially suffered the second torn ACL, they were, I guess, on the record, but even off the record, saying June or July, something like that.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
To start, by the way, playing in games, not be back in the Twins lineup. Right. And now he's playing in games before mid-May or in mid-May. Even the full 20-day rehab will bring him essentially to June 1st.
Yeah, May 31st. May 30th would be the last day of the 20-day rehab.
Here's a weird quirk of that, by the way. He's not, even if they wanted to, let's say he went to AAA on the rehab assignment and homered in 8 straight games, they can't activate him from the 60-day injured list until June 1st anyway.
Oh, really?
Because he was placed on March 30th, which is the first day of the race.
Well, I also looked, May 31st, they are on the road at Houston for a day game, and then they come home. That's their getaway day, and they come home, and June 1st is when they start a series versus Cleveland
Somebody phrased it as first week of June was sort of the... Now, I want to be clear here, like, there's nothing guaranteeing Royce Lewis from having a smooth rehab assignment.
Right.
There's nothing guaranteeing him from not having a setback. There's nothing... I mean, he went 0 for 3 with 3 strikeouts last night. Like, this is a guy who has...
Batting number 2, though. Well, they put it right at the top of the order already.
But this guy has played, I think, 46 games in the last 4 years, essentially.
Right.
Or 4 seasons. 3 seasons, I guess. He's going to be rusty. He's got the injury itself, which John knows all about. John's doing PT for his own knee surgery. And there's just... He wasn't exactly cemented as a great major leaguer before that.
Yeah, right.
I mean, there are all sorts of questions he has to answer. So there's a very real possibility that he does the 20-day rehab assignment, first at AA, then at AAA. He hits 240 or something. He plays most of the time. He's, his knee hopefully is fine. And they just say, he could use a little bit more time. And they just option him to AAA, in which case Kyle Farmer keeps rolling along at third base. But if things go perfectly, and if Royce Lewis looks anywhere as good as he did coming off the first surgery, when he was great for St. Paul for 30 games, got called up to the Twins, and was great for the Twins in a dozen games before suffering the same injury, the path is so clear for him now to be at third base, to the point that I wrote about this yesterday, but to the point that I wonder if Jose Miranda's window to be the, quote unquote Twins starting third baseman, I'm not going to say it's closed, but it might already be closing. Like,
he might already be the second most likely to be in that window.
Yes.
Royce Lewis might be ahead of him now.
Right. And let's say Miranda goes to AAA and puts in a month at AAA and looks good.
Tears it up.
Well, by that point, Lewis could already be at third base.
Right.
And soon after that, Brooks Lee might also be at AAA.
Yeah.
Potentially.
One of the interesting things about where Lewis is playing right now is he's playing with Brooks Lee.
Yeah, last night. Brooks Lee was at shortstop and Lewis was at third. I'm very curious to see.
I am too.
Doe and I were talking about this because he likes to nerd out about this stuff too, which is they've said that Lewis is going to play shortstop and third
base. Right.
Now, I think the demotion of Miranda makes it pretty clear that third is going to be the focus.
Sure.
But what I'm curious about is the days that he plays short at AA, does Lee take a day off? Does Lee DH or does Lee play third?
Right.
Because if he's only played shortstop since they drafted him last year, and he only played shortstop in college.
Okay, I was wondering if he played any other positions.
I don't think. I mean, like DH, I think he might have played. But I've also heard some indications that they don't expect the bulk of the rehab to occur at AA anyway. It was more Wichita's closer to his home in Texas.
Right, yeah.
Let's get him a handful of games there and get him to St. Paul, basically. And once you're at St. Paul, it's not the infield. Well, they have some decent players in the infield, Michael Hellman and some guys like that, Ed Julian at second base. The shortstop, third base situation at St. Paul is just pick. You can pick where you want to play, basically. So yeah, but let's I feel like we get caught up in the Miranda and can Lewis replace. Let's just set that aside and say it's pretty great that Royce Lewis, the first draft pick of this regime and one of the best prospects that the Twins have had in the last 20 years, and a guy who showed some real promise in a very brief, all too brief window with the Twins, is ahead of schedule and playing in games again. And we're actually at a point where we're talking about how are they going to reintegrate him into the Twins lineup. That's great news. All this other stuff is just, a domino effect of what is generally very good news with Royce Lewis. Now, it's not good news with Jose Miranda, but that's separate. Right. But let's see. A few other just Miranda news and notes.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about Miranda's strengths and weaknesses and all that stuff. We don't need to rehash all that. But in talking to Baldelli and some other people around the team right after the demotion a couple days ago, it's very clear that they've told him two things. One, work on your defense at third. Although I'm curious how much third he plays at AAA. Does he play first some at AAA, which he had not played for the Twins this year? He played during spring training.
How much has Hellman been playing third base, I wonder?
Hellman plays everywhere. He played shortstop yesterday, I think. But the real thing that they told him is you've got to figure out a way to rein in this ultra aggressive, I can put any ball in play, so I'll just swing at everything approach. Because what we saw from him is when he's swinging at strikes, he has incredible potential. He's got legitimate 25 homer power to the pull side, and he can send balls into the right center field gap for doubles. And he can, he's a singles hitter at times. He makes tons of contact, but he gets himself into
He should be a good number 3, number 4 kind of guy, right?
But he's so overly aggressive, and he has such good contact skills that a lot of players are overly aggressive. We talked to Carlos Correa about this, who's something of a mentor to Miranda.
Right, yeah.
And Correa said what we've both said over the years about Miranda, which is your greatest strength, which is the ability to make, put barrel on ball consistently, which he has better than a lot of Twins players.
Rosario-ish.
Right. Can become your greatest weakness if you're not carefully choosing which pitches you swing at, because your swings produce a lot of balls in play.
Right.
You're much more likely when you swing to put a ball in play than the average player. And so Correa said this, and we've said this, and Baldelli said this, and I'm sure Miranda knows it, which is it becomes a weakness for him the more aggressive he gets. The ability to make contact becomes a bigger weakness, because then what it turns into is just these, 3 hoppers to third base with a guy on base, and it's an easy double play. Right. Or the quality of his contact has gotten so low, and the plate discipline has gotten so bad that he's just giving away at bats to pitchers.
Also, when he gets to the point where he starts to struggle, you can see that leading to even more struggles. His way of fixing that is to get more aggressive.
Yes.
And it looked at the end like he was trying to be less aggressive, and he was just taking first pitch strikes on a regular basis, because they're like,
the one that I think really solidified in my mind, at least, that he was just kind of in the woods was, I think it was against Cleveland, or maybe it was, I don't know, it was on the road trip where they had walked the bases loaded. I think two of the previous two batters had walked, and then he's up there hacking at, chin high fastballs, and he's wanting to hit a 15-run homer, basically. And I get it, because you're struggling. But, man, you need some discipline or some, you can be aggressive. He's never going to be Joe Mauer at the plate. I mean, he's never going to be a high on-base percentage guy. But what they have to kind of...
his aggressiveness doesn't result in a ton of strikeouts usually either, right?
No,
because he doesn't have an 8-to-1 strikeout ratio like Rosario did.
That's why he's so intriguing as a player.
Right.
Which is if you can just get him to kind of swing at strikes,
right.
which is during his breakout season in the minors and at times last year, it wasn't that he was ultra patient. It's just that he was sort of patient.
Right. Yeah.
And if you can get ahead in counts or not do pitchers a favor by just swinging at whatever crap they throw up there, then they have to come to you in the strike zone, and then he's super talented, and he can do big damage on it. So I think that's going to be the thing to watch with him is, chase rate on pitches outside the strike zone. Ground ball rate is going to be something to watch with him, and then which position he's actually playing at AAA. I think there was one other. Let me just... The one thing I'll say there in terms of like, is he done as the Twins' third baseman? I'm not saying he's literally never going to play third. I'm just saying he's worse defensively than Lewis, than Lee, than Farmer for that matter.
Right.
And so he's not going to win any tiebreakers to kind of be an option at third base. And by the time he's ready to...
But nobody's going to... It doesn't have to worry about a tiebreaker if he just hits.
Don't swear, John. It's not the Patreon, buddy.
I meant freaking. Sorry about that.
Yeah, well, that's... Yeah.
I forget which one we're doing.
You tell that to God when you get to the pearly gates, John.
When it comes... it's simple, right? He just has to hit.
Right.
If he hits, all the rest of it just takes care of itself.
Yeah, although I agree. And if you're at third and you're a bad defensive third baseman, the bar for offense is pretty high.
Right.
If instead you're a first baseman or a DH where defense matters less, although we saw last year he wasn't exactly great at first base.
Right. He was also just learning it.
Sure. But the bar is also high there because that's where all the guys who can't field are there. And what I will say is I agree. The way for him to get back into the Twins' plans, and I don't think it's impossible by any means. I think there's a decent chance. It's just to hit. Right. And I don't mean be a 110 OPS plus guy. Right. I mean be a 125, 130 OPS. Yeah. Be a 280, 25 homer guy. Right. That's what he's got to be. And
they thought he was.
I think he can still be that.
Yeah,
the talent, the skill set is there for him to do that. It's a matter of, can he rein in his aggression? Can he tone down what is by far the biggest weakness in his game and is such a weakness that is a chance to sort of cancel out what are some real strengths? Right. But here's what I will say, though, and I agree. Just hit your way back in.
Right.
If he ends up mostly being a first baseman DH, which I think where this is headed, at least for the Twins, there's always going to be competition over there.
Right.
You're not going to get a clean look at that either, particularly with this twin, because you've got Kirilloff now at first, who's, I think, the same age as Miranda.
Well, that's true. Yeah, probably.
I think
Kirilloff 24?
I think they're both 24 or 25.
Yeah, I know Miranda's 24.
They're basically the same age. I think Ed Julian's going to end up at first base or DH. I think Matt Wallner's probably going to end up as a DH. And then just in general, as we've seen over the years, there's a lot of just guys who can hit pretty well at first base, DH. So whether he stays at third or whether he moves down the defensive spectrum, he can't just be he's a pretty good hitter. Jose Miranda, as a pretty good hitter, is a role player. And I think that's the middle ground that they want to kind of get him past.
Right, yes, I agree with you. And I think there was so much excitement around him in spring training and
he had a great spring.
Right, that's right.
Offensively.
That I think the thought process is, no, he is a special hitter. He's just not, it's not even been to the point where he's been like, he's close, but he's just been absolutely lost. So
part of me,
I guess I should shake my confidence a little bit, but in him. But I ultimately have a fair amount of confidence that he's going to find his way out of this thing.
Yeah,
so.
I think he has the talent to do it. What I worry about is part of
not good enough to be good.
Yeah, it's not enough to just be. He's a pretty good hitter. But what I really worry about are these struggles that we've seen with the aggression and swinging at bad pitches and just weak contact and all that, is that just him, what he looks like in a bad part, or like a bad zone?
Right.
Or is that pitchers learning how to attack him and kind of using his own weakness against him and saying, why am I throwing this guy strikes at all? I mean, we've seen this over the years. They did that with Astudillo. Not that Astudillo is anywhere near Miranda in terms of talent, but it was cute at first with Astudillo, and then pitchers realized, I don't have to throw this guy a GD strike. He'll swing at whatever I throw up there. Before we talk about Kirilloff and Larnach, let's talk about our last sponsor, which is Native Deodorant.
As you're going to the ballpark this week, and there's actually sun.
I need it. Native Deodorant.
Try to native sunscreen.
That's even better.
That's right. Yeah, I have been using it. I've actually had it I had it about a month ago. Didn't find really a need to use it until we went to the day game yesterday, and used it. I mean, it's everything that you like about the deodorant. Only now it's on sunscreen, and that you know what. You apply a crap load of sunscreen to your skin during the summer months.
You don't want, these chemicals that you can't even read the names.
Right.
You want to know what you're putting on, what's in the product, and that's what Native is really good about.
Got these nice subtle scents, which is also important. It's important to be a subtle scent because, like I said, you're putting on a lot of it sometimes. Coconut and pineapple or rosé or sweet peach and nectar for your face or body. With all of the Native sunscreen, you get protection from the sun that is free of chemical actives like oxybenzone, octinoxate, azobenzone. You know what's going on in this stuff, right? Yeah.
God bless you. Give your skin the protection it deserves with Native's mineral sunscreens. Go to Native DEO like deodorant, nativedeo.com/Gleeman. Use the promo code Gleeman at checkout. You will get 20% off your first order. That's nativedeo.com/Gleeman and use the promo code Gleeman at checkout. Okay. Kirilloff, which happened like 90 minutes after our last
After
episode.
we expected it to not happen for like a week.
Yeah.
Right.
We thought it was going to happen. We just didn't realize
And
it
we
would.
had talked last time about how lost Larnach had looked in Chicago.
And
right?
there was a lot of the same, not
over
the same,
9 with 8 strikeouts.
not the same weaknesses as Miranda.
Right.
He's a very patient hitter.
Right.
His issue is swing and miss.
Right.
And specifically making consistent contact against off-speed pitches, non-fastballs.
Right.
But yeah, it was he just looks completely lost.
Yeah.
Like how are we going to dig out of this hole?
We felt like, he'd been fighting the good fight for several weeks, and then suddenly he just looked like he had fallen off a cliff.
Right.
It become too much.
So they undid the move that was made basically coming out of spring training, which was Kirilloff coming off 2 wrist surgeries, similar to Royce Lewis coming off 2 knee surgeries, was deemed not ready for opening day. And by him not being on the opening day roster, they needed a left-handed, left field, first base DH type of bat, and that was Larnach.
Right.
And had a great first week, had that 3-run homer versus Miami, and then really, I think I looked up the number since that 4th game of the season, hit like 187 with, a 40% strikeout rate or something like that over the next month. He gets sent down. We should note, and Kirilloff comes off the IL.
Right.
And 2 things have happened since then, which is Kirilloff has made an immediate impact.
Right.
Had the walk-off winner in one of these games during San Diego, but then also drawn a lot of walks.
Yeah.
Hitting the ball hard, mostly on the ground, but hitting the ball hard.
Not stinging it the way we saw, 2 years ago.
The exit velocity is as good as just all on the ground.
Okay.
Which is something to watch.
Yeah.
Because in the past, when the wrist has started to act up again, he hits the ball on the ground.
Okay.
But these have been well struck on the ground. I've been impressed. He was never, not at the Miranda level, but he was a free swinger as a prospect. Not to the point that people cited it as a weakness, just he wasn't really looking to walk.
Right.
He was hitting 350 in the minors. And in the majors, his walk rate was, pretty sporadic. And we're dealing with a very small sample here, but he has the lowest chase rate, swinging at pitches outside the strike zone on the whole team now. Since coming up, and it's only a handful of games, but he's got 4 or 5 walks already. He's walked in a couple of key spots,
but no extra base hits.
Yeah, although the one might have been if it hadn't ended the game.
Well, I suppose you're right.
Yeah,
You're right. You're right. Yeah, that's fair.
But you're right. No, he hasn't driven a ball into a gap yet.
Yeah,
really.
right.
But we'll see. The at-bats, I think, have been good quality. The other thing that's happened since then is they sent Larnach to AAA. He homered twice last night.
Did he?
Or yesterday. I don't
Okay.
remember what time. Yeah, last night. And he's hitting like 550. And Kepler left yesterday's game
right
with it turned out to be leg cramping, but we didn't know that in the moment. We thought, here we go again with Kepler.
Right.
And we'll see how he is today. Could always be here we go again.
Right.
And my immediate thought was, they're going to just call Larnach back up, or are they going to say to themselves, well, what does it really accomplish? He hadn't hit the 2 home runs last night yet at this point. But what does it really accomplish to just immediately call him back up?
Right.
Like the whole reset idea, get him some time at AAA, get him comfortable again. So then I was saying, well, is it going to be Larnach to replace Kepler, or will it just be Wallner or Garlick? It could have been somebody like that.
Right, that's true. We got a lot of lefties coming up. I haven't taken a look at the. Okay,
yeah. Hopefully it's a moot point. We'll see with Kepler. You never know with Kepler. Minor injuries turn into a week, quite a bit with Kepler, I think. But we'll see. But good to see Larnach crushing. I mean, we're going to run into the same thing with Miranda, too, which is assuredly at some point in the next 3 weeks, some infielder's going to get hurt.
Right. Yep.
And the question is going to be, should we just call Miranda right back up, or do we want to call someone else back up specifically so that we don't mess with Miranda for a month or longer than that? Let's see. And one other... I guess, I mean,
I am excited to be able to watch Kirilloff again.
Yeah, that's really what
to me, he does not look quite the same. He's been good.
Sure.
He doesn't feel like he's quite the same, but, I think that has been sort of the sense ever since the wrist thing. That's one of the reasons they're playing him, 2 games out of 3 in St. Paul, et cetera.
They definitely were cautious with his recovery this time around.
Right.
I think if you'd watched him...
Now he's playing every game.
Well, we'll see. Depends how many lefties they face, because it's real easy to just bench him against lefties, give him time off that way. But yeah, I think if you'd watched him every day in St. Paul over the last few weeks, you might have a different impression of how he looked.
Maybe.
You know what I mean?
Maybe.
He was crushing at St. Paul. Now it's AAA,
fair point.
but you still got to hit the ball far at AAA and in the air at AAA. It's the same conversation with Lewis that we're going to have hopefully 20 days from now, which is it's easy to forget because it's been so long since they got a clean run at this thing, and so long since we've seen them at 100%, especially in Kirilloff's case, that this dude wasn't just a good prospect. Miranda and Larnach were good prospects, are good prospects, sort of. Alex Kirilloff was a great prospect.
Right, yeah.
You're right. At his peak, when they called him up in 2020 for the playoff game and he'd never even played in a regular season game, I was of the opinion that he was the best, just hitting only, not talking about defense or anything, the best hitting prospect the Twins have had since Morneau. Now, you can say that's faint praise or whatever, but they've had some pretty good hitting prospects.
Kubel was in between those two.
True. Right, yeah, that would be probably the only...
Yeah.
Then he gets hurt.
That,
they saw very brief glimpses in each of the past 2 seasons, a week or 2 at a time, or if you were at AAA, you saw it for a month last year.
Right.
But there's just been such few, we get to watch him, at even 90% health for a month here. And it's easy to forget.
And this lineup needs it.
This lineup needs
a good, solid,
absolutely
number 3, number 4 presence.
Yes.
Yeah.
Left-handed bat, the Baldelli actually talked yesterday or the day before. His thing is we need just the production from a lefty, but he didn't say it in comparison to Larnach, but it was pretty clear he was talking about that. Right. He said what really helps with Alex is he can hit everything. And that doesn't mean he's amazing against every pitch. It just means he's got a very line drive swing that stays in the zone a long time. He can gear up for fastballs, which we saw in the walk-off where the guy got behind 2-0. And I said to Hayes, he's getting a piped fastball here. We're going to find out something about Alex Kirilloff right now. Because Alex Kirilloff 3 years ago gets a walk-off here.
Right.
And, he lined one into right field. But compared to Larnach, who swings through off-speed pitches crazy, the difference is he has more of a flat, level swing, stays in the zone. He gives you a little more diversity in a lineup that does have a lot of free swingers. And he strikes out a decent amount, but it's more, you don't have to say, hopefully he gets some fastballs here, or hopefully he gets some changeups here. He can adjust everything.
There's no easy book on Kirilloff, right?
Unless he's hurt, in which case the book becomes easy.
Right. Exactly.
So I think that's important to add to this lineup. And then I had one other... Well, that's probably enough on Kirilloff. Again, if you want more on this stuff in the moment, in some cases, breaking news during an episode, subscribe to the Patreon, which is Patreon, patreon.com/Gleeman. We do at least 1 and usually 2 episodes per week. We usually do a Monday morning episode to recap the weekend, and then a Wednesday episode that's either any news that happened, mailbag, guest, etc. We would love to have you join us for the rest of the season. I have 2 random things because we basically did 3 topics. Got an update on a few injured players yesterday from Falvey. Maeda, Falvey said weeks, not months for a return.
All right.
They've not put a timetable on it.
He's not on the 60-day IL.
No, he's not. Although they haven't really needed the spot, really, right?
Right.
But Midas was there yesterday. Like, he looks fine. He seems to be in good spirits, all that. My question with Maeda is they haven't put a timetable on it. I'm going to assume it's a month plus, basically. Now, he's already been out for, what's he been out for, 10 days at this point? Or something
I'm
like
trying to remember.
I think 10 days, because Ober started twice, right? Since he came back up.
Sounds right.
Either way, couple weeks. My assumption is it's a minimum of, let's say, 3 more weeks, and it could be significantly longer. That I'm somewhat skeptical that he's going to be able to build back up fully as a starter and rejoin the rotation, and let alone is he their best option to start whenever he does come back if Ober and Varlin are, now somebody will probably be hurt by then, so it'll be a moot point. But that was somewhat encouraging, I would say, although that just puts you right back where you were coming out of spring training with Maeda, where there's just a lot of question marks about stuff and readiness and all that. A couple other people that people have been asking a lot about found out. Jordan Balazovic started off pitching as a reliever at AAA, and then most recently made a 4-inning start at AAA and has been very good. Falvey praised him, which was not a given, let's say, considering what happened in spring training when he got punched in the face and broke his jaw, and they weren't real thrilled about that. Praised him for working his way back, praised his stuff for looking very much like it did 2 years ago before he had a rough season last year. But Falvey said, don't assume by the quote-unquote starts at AAA that we're grooming him to be a starter again.
Yes.
Long
I've
relief
heard the same thing.
Or multi-inning relief is what they're preparing him for, at least this season. I think the hope would be a couple weeks from now, let's say, he can just kind of join the bucket of Cole Sands and Brent Hedrick and Simeon Woods Richardson, Derek Rodriguez, call him up for a few days as a long reliever group, basically. And from there, you can potentially pitch yourself into more of a role if you look great in that spot, which Balazovic has a chance to do, maybe more of a chance than any of those other guys just from a talent standpoint. So I don't think it's imminent that they're going to call him up, but I think he's close to at least being
an option
included now in the bullpen, shuffling that goes on.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, if they do end up going that route where he ends up doing, kind of long relief, it doesn't necessarily, the door isn't shut for him ever being a starter.
Sure.
Like, that's the whole point of sort of having that sort of longer arm. You can still are more pitches. Next year, you could still go, we think this guy's going to be back to being a starter after, last year's struggles and such. Maybe we find a kind of in between spot for him right now. But I'm hearing the same thing, which is this. They just sort of feel like his future is sort of in the bullpen.
Oh, John's got other sources.
Other folks.
Sometimes I tell myself stuff, and then I say, source close to the team says, Ronnie Henriquez, speaking of long relievers, has been moved up or activated from the IL, and now he's just optioned to AAA, which means week or two from now, if he puts together a couple good AAA outings, he could be a reliever option either as a long man or a secondary setup man. They really like him a lot. I mean, he was acquired from Texas in the Mitch Garver trade. He made a handful of appearances last September, and I thought looked pretty good. He's a converted starter, so if you look at his minor league numbers, they're not amazing because he was a starter, which is not a role he's great for, I think. But, mid-90s fastball, good slider. Changeup is kind of a work in progress, but it's unclear if he really will need that as a reliever. I think he definitely has a chance to be a functional long man for them at some point this season, but I think has the upside to, it wouldn't surprise me a year from now if he's just working the 7th inning a lot of the time for them. And then last but not least,
there were some concerns about him and spring training too. He was, like you said, he had that.
Yeah, he was shut down with almost immediately with elbow.
I thought it was elbow.
Shoulder. And then last but not least, Austin Martin, who, speaking of being shut down in spring training, basically hasn't done
an elbow.
UCL.
Yeah.
Not UCLA. UCL injury. I was told that status quo with him. No surgery, but not out of the woods yet, and basically rest and rehab and hopefully getting somewhat close to baseball activities in terms of, at least having a timeline for a rehab assignment. But I would not expect him to, be an option for the Twins in the first half of the season. Yeah. He's going to need to, first of all, he's never played at AAA.
Right.
But, so good news in the sense that he hasn't had Tommy John surgery. bad news in the sense that we're now 2 months out from the initial injury, and he's not playing in games that matter yet. Extended spring training can sometimes be different. But
position players often come back earlier from Tommy John surgery than pitchers do. So not necessarily.
It's tough if you're playing shortstop or third.
I would think so, but
first base, sure. Like your guy Bryce Harper came back in like a week and a half from Tommy John surgery because he doesn't have to throw. But.
I mean, my point is sort of like Tyler Mahle. If he waits 3 months before undergoing this stuff, and now he's pretty much lost all of next year by doing that. We might still be within sort of the time frame with Martin where if he ends up going it maybe a 10 month thing for a position player, and he can still play next year.
He can get a big chunk of next year at least.
Right.
He can save that. Yeah, there's not as much. Let's do the decision today. Let's do the surgery today so you can be ready for X date with a position player for sure.
Right.
See, there was one other. Well, where are we at? We're like deep into.
I don't know. We're pretty far.
Yeah, we talked for like 20 minutes before you hit record. I think.
Yep.
I had one. I was curious to get your thoughts on this. So, I was talking to Baldelli about the Hader game, the middle game of the series,
right?
And we mentioned this from there. They got to a point where they started pinch hitting, and they got to a spot where the game was tied in the late innings, and the only guy available on the bench was the backup catcher, Ryan Jeffers, against Josh Hader, who's one of the best relievers of the last decade, basically, but a lefty.
Right.
And he's just death on lefties. Dan looked up. He struck out, I think, 47% of his career at-bats against lefties or plate appearances against lefties have been a strikeout. You desperately do not want to send lefties up there. Meanwhile, the Twins sent Gordon and then who? Kirilloff? I forget who the other one was. Donnie Barrows had the double.
Right, yes.
That saved their ass, basically, and tied it.
That's right.
So I asked Baldelli. So they had Ryan Jeffers on the bench. Is literally the last guy on the bench. And the defense was already going to be wonky as hell.
Right.
Because you would pinch hit for multiple guys. They were going to have to probably play, if they had brought in Jeffers, to pinch hit as a righty against Hader, which you would want to do under normal circumstances.
Correct.
Instead of, like, let's say, Gordon.
Right.
What would have then happened if they hadn't won the game? They were in a position to walk it off.
Right.
But if they hadn't walked it off, then the next half inning was going to have to be one of the catchers, probably Vasquez, playing first base. You were going to have to play Willie Castro probably in center. You were going to have to play Donovan Solano at third, most likely.
Oh, man.
And then the outfield, I forget what the rest of it. But it was going to be, split squad spring training look to it. So what I asked and he didn't do that. He left Jeffers on the bench.
Right.
It worked out fine for them, but he left Jeffers on the bench. And what I asked afterward was, how much did the defense, like the notion of bringing in Jeffers is clearly, let's try to win this thing now.
Right.
Which I get that.
But you're handicapping yourself so much now in future innings.
So how do you weigh that? And so here's what Baldelli said, and I thought it was an interesting way to think about it. But as I think about it more, I'm not sure if I agree. And I'm curious what your initial reaction is to it. He said, if we would have been behind by a run, I definitely would have pinch hit Jeffers because at that point you're in danger of nothing else mattering.
Sure. Right.
And so if you don't come through with a hit there, you just lose the game. And who cares what the defensive lineman is? But because it was tie, he said, I was very tempted to bring in Jeffers and try to win it right there, which he generally gets pretty aggressive in terms of pinch running or defensive replacements or pinch hitting, kind of a let's live for today and worry about tomorrow later. I would say he's become more and more aggressive in that regard over the years. But what he said is because it was tied, I thought we have enough margin for error here that we can live to we can play on.
Worst case scenario is we're going into next inning with a decent defensive alignment, similar defensive alignment to what I have right now, and now I don't have to face Hader.
Yes,
which is not a bad situation.
If Hader does stay out there, you can turn to Jeffers in that scenario if you'd like, or you can assess the situation based on if they scored in their half of the inning and all that. And so in the moment, I was like, well, to me, because I guess probably I viewed their likely defensive alignment, even without using Jeffers, as worse than Baldelli did. like I was pretty worried about having to play an inning, especially they were not going to be using their best relievers at that point.
Right.
I would have been in a spot where I worried about pretty much every ball in play. Maybe Baldelli was less.
Well, especially when you've got starting with a runner on second base, like you already need to play such good, so much. Those little fielding mistakes mean so much,
right?
In that situation, to kneecap yourself amongst 3 different positions.
Yes,
at that point.
But I wonder if that's almost more of an argument for doing whatever you possibly can to end it. Whereas I think use Jeffers there. First of all, I had no faith in Gordon getting a hit, but he did get a hit.
Right. Yeah. Right.
So I was wrong about that.
Yeah, right.
But my thing is like, I viewed the defense at that point as like a D- defense.
Right.
So who cares if it goes to an F defense? Do you know what I mean? Like,
what was the defense without all these moves going on?
I mean, you were the only thing that wouldn't have changed was center because Gordon could keep playing center. But you had Willie Castro at third. You were going to have to play Solano at first. You were going to have to.
Yeah, but that's a lot different than playing Solano at third and Christian Vasquez at first.
But
I mean, you're right. That's not great defense.
Yes.
That's a great point.
I agree.
You raise a good point.
But what is realistically? Now Nick Gordon got a hit, so you're going to convince yourself now that it's like a high. Right. But realistically, Nick Gordon versus Josh Hader has to be like a maybe 125 expected batting average, something like that,
not
right?
Even that.
Now, Ryan Jeffers against Josh Hader is probably only like a 200 expected batting average, right?
That's almost twice as much.
Right.
Probably,
and it ends the game if he gets a hit.
Right.
I mean, it doesn't end, but it puts them in a very good position to end the game. Right. So, I don't know. I really wavered. Like, as he was explaining this to me, and I liked that he really talked it through, and you could see like how he was thinking about it. And I've changed my stance on this like 3 times since he said this. I in the moment I was like I 100% would have used Jeffers. Then he explained the tie versus losing thought process that he had, and I said, okay, that makes some sense. It's similar to using your closer in a tie game versus saving them for a save situation. There's a margin for error at least that you can do all that stuff. But then I kind of came around to saying, well, I already think the defense was an absolute mess, so who cares if it gets even a little bit messier? Don't I want to just do whatever I want to empty every bullet I can to try to end the game right then and there? So what is your...
my initial take is I agree with Rocco that it's a lot more important to do that if you're down by a run versus even, right?
That's logical to me, yeah.
That in the same way that... it's a much higher leverage situation for a pitcher to be in up by 1 run versus versus a tie or versus a low versus down by a run. The opposite is true for hitters, right? So if you're down by 1 run, that's a higher leverage situation for the batter, right? So my baseline is that is absolutely true, and
I just think the extreme nature of Hader himself and Gordon and the defense skews like the normal percentages.
I'm with you. I mean, Hader's also, just like you said, Hader's also so good just against Jeffers.
True.
That's
not exactly a great matchup for the Twins.
Right. I mean, you're not, listen, I don't like Gordon in that situation. You're maybe doubling your odds in terms of your ability to get a hit.
But you're doubling them.
But you're also now, there's a 80% chance that you're going out with that piece of crap defensive outplay that you're right, as opposed to a 1 in 5 piece. So yeah, I would say, I guess I would agree, because basically what I would say is desperate times require desperate measures, and that is a desperate measure that you save for a desperate time. And that desperate time is when you're down by a run versus even.
Yeah,
so that's fair. That's where I would.
I also think that there's a little bit of value in keeping one guy on the bench in case somebody gets hurt or in case whatever happens. Now at that point, it's so late in the game. But I guess it's the same type of logic that we've talked about before, and I think we're both on board with it, is like I would much rather use my closer in, let's say, the 10th inning of a tie game.
Right.
And then if let's say on the road even.
Right.
And if you take the lead, then yes, you do need to use a lesser reliever to get the save.
Right.
But he now has some margin for error.
Right.
He can give up a run or 2 or 3.
Right.
And you can still potentially win the game. I guess that's the hitting version of that, which is
you still
have enough margin for error that you don't have to push every possible button and unload the clip, basically. But this is, by the way, I'm sure like I might be the only person who cares about this, but Like, I think Baldelli was even like, why? Who cares? But this is the type of stuff, I almost swore too, that you think after 20 years of doing this, we've talked about every possible strategic roster, statistical, whatever.
Something like this comes up. It's like
every homestand or every week, there's one thing where you're like, oh, that's interesting. Like, you could have done this, but then it would have meant that, and then I bet the other team would have done this. And it's like, yeah, have we seen versions of this? For sure. But
that's why we like to talk about the stuff for an hour and a half every week.
Sometimes more. Okay.
Every other day.
That's enough. So you agree with Baldelli?
I think I do. Yeah.
Such a homer.
That's the way. I like to suck up to the manager.
If you disagreed, I was going to say, will you stop at nothing from criticizing Rocco Baldelli? Okay. Thank you to, let's read through these. Native.
Yes.
MyBookie. BetterHelp. HelloFresh.
And Soda
Stick.
Right.
We will be back bright and early Monday morning, but only for the Patreon subscribers.
That is correct. We'd love to have you join us.
Of which you can become one. By, if you love the show, it's the best way to support us, and you get extra shows commercial free.
Yes,
by the way, those
absolutely
shows.
Commercial free.
We'll recap the entire Cubs series and any further news that comes over these next 3 games. That's Patreon, patreon.com/Gleeman. We would love to have you join us. Until then, keep your confidence high and your
expectations low.
Yeah, okay, there we go. Keep your confidence high and your maybe that's our new catchphrase.
Bye.
Gleeman